online plenary of the IDESG. This is Kay Chopard-Cohen, the Executive Director for the IDSG. This meeting will be led today by the plenary chair, Bob Blakely. But before we begin, I just want to make sure that everyone understands the sort of technical support issues of how today's meeting will work. Hopefully you are logged in okay online and you can see the slide that is currently up. So just to review it, first of all, today's online plenary meeting is being recorded. For audio for this meeting, it will be coming through your computer speakers. If you look at your screen in the lower left-hand corner, you should see a speaker that you can use to adjust the sound or to turn the sound on or off. By default, your computer microphone, meaning your ability to talk and speak and be heard, has been muted. So you won't be able to hear, we won't be able to hear you if you're talking. If you would like to ask a question and you would like to just simply do it as a chat, you can see sort of more in the middle of the page, there's a chat box, and one is for the general chat where you can write general questions. If you have a technical support question because you have something that's not working correctly, there is another chat and you'll see a little tab there labeled technical support. So that's specifically for technical issues you're having. If you want to put it there, someone will be specifically monitoring that to try to work with you directly. If you would like to be unmuted so that you can speak, we'd ask that you raise your hand so that we get that indication. And to do that, again, if you go back to the lower left-hand corner of your screen where the audio symbols were, there's also, you should see a little head of a person, a generic kind of person. Next to it is an arrow, and if you click on that, you should be able to raise your hand using that icon. And then once you do that, and we know that you want to speak, then you'll be given instructions specifically to you about how to go about asking your question over the phone. If during the course of this you would like to send a chat message or a question to someone privately, where you just want to ask one person instead of the general chat that everyone can view, if you go to their name on the left-hand side, you'll see everybody that's logged in listed, and you click on their name and select private message, then you can have a private chat with any of the presenters or any of the participants in today's call. So just as a reminder, again, today's online plenary meeting is being recorded so that everyone is aware of that before we get started. And I'd like to turn the session over now to the plenary chair, Bob Blakely.
Thanks very much, Kay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. So I have a question I'll note in the chat room at the moment, and the question is from Eric Skase, and the question is, do we have a quorum? So Sudi, you can start working on answering that question. I will note, however, for the record, that today's meeting is not a meeting at which any votes or actions are scheduled. This is an informational meeting leading up to an electronic deliberation which will open in the near future. And since there are not any decisions to be taken by the plenary at today's meeting, our rules do not require us to have a quorum to continue to conduct the meeting today. So with that, I think we will get started, and I'll start by going over the agenda. By the way, I should also note, as Kay noted, that you're free at any time to enter comments into the chat area, and we'll take comments that way. If you would prefer if you have more extended comments or discussions, if you would prefer to ask to be recognized to speak in the audio channel, please send a message to Laura or Kay, preferably Laura, via the chat mechanism, and they will give you instructions for getting into the audio channel. So welcome, everybody, to today's online plenary meeting. We have 2 items on our agenda, and the 2 items are up on the screen in front of you today. The first is to go over one last time the procedures for e-deliberation. These have been presented at 2 previous plenary meetings, including our most recent in-person meeting. I have made the amendments which have been recommended by the plenary at that meeting, and I'm giving you here today an overview of the final form of those rules, which will be placed into the electronic ballot shortly. And then the second agenda item is a recommendation from the Management Council to file articles of incorporation for IDESG as a nonprofit corporation. This is an item which you've been receiving updates on from Kim Little on a periodic basis. Kim is going to present to you the recommendation that the Management Council has brought forward to the organization in terms of filing for incorporation and some of the details of that. So that's the agenda for today. This is intended to give you the opportunity to discuss and ask questions about either of these proposals. And so with that, let's kick off the first agenda item. And Kay, if I could have the next slide, please. So you'll recall that one of the last outstanding work items for the Special Committee on Governance was to propose a set of procedures for e-deliberation. Those procedures have now been socialized with the membership a couple of times. We've had a number of rounds of feedback and amendments to the proposal. I had a hand in the preparation of the specifics of the proposal. I've made all the changes which all y'all requested at the previous meeting, and now I'm going to go over with you the final form of the amendment to the Rules of Association, which implements e-deliberation. As the slide notes, pardon me, you can download the text of the documents at the URL on the slide. So the first element of the amendment is that Section 5 is amended to read as follows, and the text is on the screen in front of you. The main caveat here is that committees can adopt decision-making protocols in their charter, and also we removed a few specific references to the distinction between electronic and in-person meetings to be replaced by the text that you're going to see on the following slides. So, by the way, Laura has linked the documents in the chat room, so if you want to take a look, you can actually open them directly from the electronic meeting screen here in the chat area down at the bottom of your screen. Kay, could I have the next slide, please? So, again, if you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to raise a chat in the area at the bottom, or to send a chat to Laura to ask to be recognized to speak in the audio channel. So again, the text for the e-deliberation procedures is on the screen in front of you. The basic idea of these procedures is to mimic the structure that we have already got in the Rules of Association for deliberations on proposals that are put before the plenary. And you'll recall that in the in-person meetings we have this sort of two-phase procedure whereby there's a first reading and that is essentially a consensus deliberation. There can then be a failure to achieve consensus, and if that takes place, then the document is sent back to the originating organization, whether that be an individual or a committee, and then there's an opportunity for a second round, and at the second round it's possible for a vote to take place, and the voting rules are set out in the Rules of Association. So what this section says is, first of all, it gives the plenary the ability to conduct business by electronic deliberation. It sets forth a three-part procedure consisting of a markup conference, a study period, and an electronic ballot, and it requires notice of a markup conference to be posted before the initiation of the electronic deliberation procedure. Kay, could we have the next slide, please? So I have a comment in the chat room. The question is the proposed amendment number 5 intended to Section 5.2 intended to allow committees to use decision-making processes internally that differ from other committees and the plenary, and if so, why is that necessary? So actually that part of the rules hasn't been amended. That language is the same as the pre-existing language, and committees have been given the flexibility to adopt decision-making processes that are appropriate to their way of doing business. But that is actually the existing procedure under the Rules of Association. It's not new. So the next slide, the one on the screen in front of you, describes the markup conference, and the basics of the markup conference are that there's 15 calendar day notice. You'll note, by the way, that throughout, in accordance with the direction of the plenary at the last meeting, I have changed all notice and other intervals required under the e-deliberation rules to be calendar day intervals rather than to be business day intervals, and this is one of the sections in which it's affected. And so 54111 also describes what needs to be in the notice for the markup conference, and notes that electronic deliberations have the same Management Council and Privacy Committee review requirements as in-person deliberations. And 54112 notes that for a markup conference to take place, since it is potentially a decision-making meeting because amendments can be offered and disposed of during a markup conference, it is necessary to have a quorum of people actually online, unlike for today's meeting, per Eric's earlier question. Can I have the next slide, please, Kay? So 54113 describes the conduct of the markup conference. Basically, the idea is that any motions which have been put onto the agenda in advance of the markup conference in the noticed agenda are taken up in order, and they are considered according to the ordinary Robert's Rules of Order, and amendments can be proposed during the markup conference, and those are disposed of in the usual Robert's Rules of Order way, with the caveat that per our usual procedures, the chair should always seek unanimous consent before proceeding to a vote. So it's basically a recognition of the fact that we prefer to do business by consensus, and if there isn't consensus, that's something which needs to be taken into account by the membership and made public. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. So at the end of the markup conference, the Secretariat posts all of the motions that are approved by the markup conference as amended to the IDESG website. And by the way, note that the text here says approved, not adopted. Okay, these are just approved by the markup conference, and they are then sent to the electronic ballot for adoption. So what goes into the markup conference is motions. what comes out is approved amended motions. And by the way, there may be motions that were not approved, right? So a motion may go into the markup conference and people may say, no, I don't think that's a good idea, and a vote may fail, and that simply doesn't get posted to the website because it's not eligible for consideration at the electronic deliberation. So the motions as approved by the markup conference in section 5412, it's noted that those stay on the IDESG website for a study period. This is basically a 2-week study period, 15 calendar days. Again, everything expressed in calendar days. And the purpose of this study period is so that anybody who wasn't present during the markup conference has a chance to digest the output of the markup conference and decide whether or not they ought to vote in favor or against. So there's a 2-week study period, 15 calendar days, prior to the opening of the electronic ballot. And then next slide, please. Okay, just a minute. I have a So, by the way, Sudi informs me, speaking of quorum, that we are now, we have achieved quorum based on the attendance at the MIT plenary. So, in answer to the earlier question, we are quorate, although it doesn't seem likely that there'll be a reason for that to be important in today's meeting. So during the study period, any IDESG member may raise an objection to the adoption of any of the motions which were approved by the markup conference. And so the point of the objections is simply a matter of efficiency. If we go through a markup conference, an amendment is approved by the markup conference, and during the 2-week study period nobody objects, we simply don't add that motion to the electronic ballot. We consider it to have been adopted by consensus, and the reason for that is, number one, we prefer to do business as a consensus organization, and number two, there isn't a reason to waste both people's time and the organization's resources on a motion which has essentially unanimous consent. But if there is an objection raised by any member during the study period, then the motion gets put on the electronic ballot and proceeds to a vote. And again, this parallels our in-person meeting procedures where we have an attempt to achieve consensus, and if consensus isn't achieved, then we proceed to a vote. So if I could have the next slide, please. So any approved motion which has an objection raised against it goes to the electronic ballot. The Secretariat has to post notice of the opening date and duration of the electronic ballot at least 7 calendar days in advance. So there's a 7-day notice of the opening date of the ballot. And as has been our practice with electronic deliberations in the past, including the one that will come up next, which will be the last one that will take place under our old procedures, the electronic ballot will remain open for voting for at least 14 calendar days. And if we could have the next slide. Anybody who is a member of the IDESG is eligible to vote in the electronic ballot, and the motions are approved if it receives a percentage of votes cast as required in section 5322. So basically this is the same set of rules that say we need a 2/3 majority ordinarily to adopt a motion, and we need a 3/4 majority to adopt any item for which the Privacy Committee has lodged a formal objection. So continue to the next slide, please. Section on this slide, section 1216.3, this basically extends the existing rule, which says that we substitute the 14-day interval for the vote for a numerical quorum in electronic deliberations. This is just the same way that we've been doing business up till now. And then the second bullet on this slide simply amends Section A of Special Rule of Order Number 1 to reflect the fact that we now have both electronic and in-person rules. And so whereas formerly Section A covered both electronic and in-person rules, now Section A covers only in-person rules, and it is substituted by all of the stuff that I've just explained in the case of electronic rules. I see that someone is attempting to send me a question in the chat window, so I'll wait for a minute to receive that. But before we do that, Kay, could I see what the next slide is, just to relieve me a little of the suspense? Okay, so we are at the question and answer period. So at this point, I'm going to sit here and be quiet for a moment. I'm going to examine the chat window. I encourage any of you who have questions about this material to send a note either to the general chat or to me specifically in the chat window. And if anyone would like to be recognized to speak in the audio conference, please send a chat to Laura Barman to be recognized to do that. So I have a chat from David Rosenberg asking if there's a presumption that all electronic ballots will be binary, or might some electronic ballot votes be multiple choice? That is, we have to select alternative A, alternative B, alternative C. So there is a provision in the amended rules that allows the chair to circulate guidelines for the markup conference, which would allow things other than binary ballots. But as the relatively strong presumption is that the ballots will be binary ballots, and hence the references to Robert's Rules of Order in terms of a motion and amendments, which are then considered on yes or no votes, and then the motion either approved or not approved. And the presumption is that when a motion is approved, it proceeds to a yes or no vote in the electronic ballot. So David, the answer to your question is that yes, there is a presumption that all electronic ballot votes will be binary. That's not an ironclad rule as reflected in the text, but I don't foresee a circumstance in which we would offer multiple options. I think Daza is typing something, so I'm just going to scroll up and down and see whether anybody else is asking to be recognized. So if you do have a comment or a question, if you go to the lower left, there's a little blue guy in the very lower left of your screen, and if you click on the little arrow next to him, you can raise your hand. So if you are composing, a War and Peace kind of length novel in the chat room, or if you'd like to be recognized in the audio channel or something, if you could raise your little blue guy's hand so that I know how many people are in the queue, that would be helpful. And if I don't see a lot of comments after I get through the queue and see whether Daza has something to say to this particular part of the proceedings, I will proceed to hand the microphone over to Kim for her phase of the discussion. I will note, by the way, that the next step in the procedure for this item on the agenda, item number 1. By the way, Daza, if you think that I should pause and wait for you to send a chat, or that you'd like to speak in the audio channel, please raise your little blue guy's hand. So the next step in this particular procedure is for the amendment to the Rules of Association adopting the electronic deliberation procedures to be placed on a ballot, which will be opened no later than the 23rd of this month. I will pause and be silent for a moment and look through the list to see whether anyone has questions or comments. There's a comment in the chat room from Daza. It says that it appears that the current and proposed e-deliberation rules on decision making ensure any voting member ample opportunity to pose amendments. Wondering how are amendments and deliberation being handled for the second item today, new entity, and how, if at all, the process for posing amendments would be different under the new e-deliberation rules. Without going over the substance of the next item is not, strictly speaking, an amendment to our current procedures. It's a request to endorse an action proposed by the Management Council, so it's not clear that amendment is an active consideration, but we'll have that conversation in sequence as we arrive at that discussion. However, to the second half of Daza's question, the process for proposing amendments under the new e-deliberation rules is different in detail, but not in spirit, from how we've done these things in the past for our previous e-deliberations. So the process in the new e-deliberation rules gives an explicit opportunity during the markup conference for any member to propose an amendment to a motion from the floor, and that amendment is then considered in the usual parliamentary way during the markup conference, and if the amendment succeeds, then the amended resolution is what goes to the e-ballot. If it fails, then the unamended resolution is what goes forward for consideration on the electronic ballot. I'll pause again for just a moment and see whether anyone has additional questions before we move on to the next item. I see someone typing, so I will wait for a moment. Okay, I have, so as you can see in your chat window, Brian Russell has has told me that there's no question at this time. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to move on to the next slide. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so Peter Brown, who is the chair of the Management Council, unfortunately is unable to be with us today. Something about the curvature of the Earth and timescales. I do. Let's see. I do have a couple more questions here first. So Anne Rikuya Robbins asks, "Can we get a transcript of the answers?" My understanding is that in fact this webcast is being recorded, so I believe it will be possible to get a transcript of the answers. Laura or Sudi, can you say a word about how members might get access to the record of this meeting?
So Bob, this recording would be available. I don't know that we will be generating a transcript, like a written transcript, but the availability of the recording, would be subject to the Management Council and your decision in terms of releasing the information.
Okay, so Anne, why don't you send me an email offline about what information you want and what you intend to use it for. If it would be something that would be published outside the IDESG, there could be privacy considerations regarding this. So get in touch with me. The information will be available to us, and I'm sure that we can satisfy your needs for information. But we'll just have to make sure that we do that in a procedurally correct fashion. Is that? If that's not okay, please type another comment into the chat room. Steve Brook also notes that he asks whether there's been any discussion regarding mandatory reminders sent out to the IDESG membership. So the current practice of the Secretariat has been to send out reminders in advance of every noticed meeting. So that is the current practice of the organization. There is a little sensitivity to the frequency and volume of reminders because people can only tolerate so much email. So maybe again, Sudi or Kay would like to say a word about current practices in terms of sending out reminders for electronic deliberations.
So Bob, we periodically send out a message about upcoming deliberation, and when new documents are posted, we send out a broadcast message as well as a message on the website. We try to minimize spam in terms of complaints that we have received from some members about too many emails. So we're trying to, balance the excessive email versus need to know.
Thank you. One more second, please. Okay, so as I was saying, our Management Council Chair, Peter Brown, is unable to be with us today because he's in a part of the world where it's appropriate to be sleeping rather than doing other things. So what I'm going to ask is that our Management Council Vice Chair, Jeremy Grant, introduce us by saying a few words about the Management Council activity that led up to this recommendation, and then that Jeremy introduce Kim to take us through the recommendation. Jeremy, are you on and audible?
I am on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That is fantastic, then. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your afternoon to join the online plenary. So when the MPO awarded a grant about a year and a half ago to, it wasn't even a year and a half ago, it was about a year and 3 months ago to Trusted Federal Systems, one of the activities that was incredibly important for TFS to take up along with the new fledgling organization was to start working on a path for the IDESG to become a self-sustaining organization. The government from the start always said that we were willing and able to essentially kickstart the creation of the steering group, but since this is something that needs to be privately led, that funding was not going to last forever, and we basically set a 24-month period for the initial grant, at which point somewhere, relatively quickly after the group was set up, it was going to need to find a way to become self-sustaining. Under the work that Kim Little has done within the Management Council, Kim was great enough to chair a group focusing on business sustainment, working closely with Management Council members, others from the plenary who were interested in joining, and through TFS, who, among other things, engaged an attorney who specializes in these sorts of things. The Management Council has come up with a great plan forward, at least from our perspective, from the Business Plan Transition and Sustainment Subcommittee to actually start making the transition. The questions come up a couple times about, why are we doing this now if the grant actually runs until the middle of 2014? And the answer is that the lead time involved with actually starting up a transition or initiating a transition and then executing it actually is fairly substantial between what it takes to incorporate and then getting a membership fee structure in place that would actually allow the new organization to then start collecting fees from people, and giving all of the organizations and individuals who are members of the IDESG the lead time within their companies and nonprofits and others to actually contemplate whether they're actually able to, candidly cut a check to continue to support participation in it. These things take a lot of time. In addition, from the MPO, we've indicated our willingness to contemplate, if the group can successfully make the transition, continuing to supplement the activities of the IDESG with some additional grant funding. Specifically, we're looking at an organization similar to, or a structure for grants in the future, similar to what the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel has done over the last year. SGIP, for those who don't know, is another nonprofit that was originally set up by NIST to handle a very different issue around the electric grid. It was funded for its initial years, and it's now transitioned to an organization where the members are basically paying the secretariat fees, to do the things that we're doing today. But NIST has thrown in some supplemental grant funding to essentially accelerate the pace of deliverable production within the organization and, provide other levels of support. And certainly talking with my management chain at NIST and talking with other folks in the White House, I think we're of the view that if the group can make the change and make it quickly, there's a good argument that we should, continue to look to support the IDESG and all that it does. But timing is also very important for that. The new fiscal year starts here in about 12 days. While we don't expect to have a budget approved by Congress on day one, and it's hard to forecast exactly when Congress will get around to doing that, Commerce Department's budget seems to squeeze out from the Hill quicker sometimes than others, and we will want to initiate any follow-on grant solicitation, and it will have to be a competitive solicitation, by the way, as soon as possible. There's a number of things that any new organization has to do in terms of getting the right numbers and registrations to actually be qualified to apply for a federal grant. And so this is really the kind of thing where, from our perspective, the steering group can't move fast enough to initiate this transition. Our concern would be, given some of the limited windows that we work in, being the government and being incredibly inefficient with some of these things, that if this ended up being an issue that where people continue to be delayed, that it would make it very difficult for any successor organization to actually be eligible to receive grant funding in the future. So with all that, I'm excited that we're as an organization starting to move forward. Who actually controls the slides? Laura, do you control that, or do I have the?
Kate to advance the slide.
Okay, so just to go through the Management Council resolution, the Management Council gathered on September 3rd and unanimously approved the following resolution, which you all can see on your screen. One, the Management Council welcomes the report and recommendations from the Business Plan Transition and Sustainment Subcommittee. Two, we're recommending IDESG incorporate as a nonprofit corporation with the intent to seek 501c3 status. You can advance. Three, we're recommending also establishing a 501c6 child organization. Four, we're naming the current members of the Management Council as the initial members of the corporation's Board of Directors. This was considered to be the cleanest way to go for a number of reasons. Fifth, we're requesting the endorsement of the plenary for the approach proposed. And sixth, we're directing the Executive Director, that is Kay, to act on this motion following consideration by the plenary.
So, Jeremy, I will point out before we hand it over to Kim, you have a question from Brian Russell asking if you're saying that if we don't incorporate by October, that IDESG won't be able to apply for future grant funding. My interpretation of what you said was slightly different from that. I believe that that IDESG will be able and eligible to apply for grant funding in the future, but if we don't incorporate in the relatively near future, there might be certain kinds of grants which require nonprofit status for which we wouldn't be eligible at the time the grant is issued.
Well,
is that right?
It's not just a matter of nonprofit. It's once you incorporate, there's then a number of things that you have to do in order to get different codes and things like that. There's 5 or 6 different federal systems, I think, and I'm actually the least expert person in our office on it. But I know certainly from going through the pilots that there were some startups that because they didn't have enough lead time to actually get themselves in the systems, some were not able to actually get, grant applications in time. So I don't want to say if you don't do it by October, you won't be able to apply for future grant funding, but my message is it's a bad idea to cut it close because particularly with the way that Congress acts and we don't have a predictable budget, it's a little bit, we're going to have to fit things into a tight window if we actually do decide to go forward. In terms of what grants may be able for you to apply, we're contemplating right now what a federal funding opportunity would look like. So beyond what I just said before in terms of, looking at the smart grid model and what the government has done there as, a sort of a true public-private partnership where some of the efforts in SGIP are being funded by the members and some are being funded through grant work. I really can't talk more about that at this time.
So to be clear, just in case anyone isn't clear about this, IDESG itself did not receive a grant initially. The grant was that has supported our operations was awarded to Trusted Federal Systems, which was an incorporated private entity, and had already done all the stuff that Jeremy is talking about in terms of applying for various kinds of federal contracting contracting numbers and all the other bureaucracy that has to be done. So IDESG is currently not eligible for a variety of funding opportunities on the basis that it hasn't gone through these various procedures of applying for, numbers and statuses and things like that. It is important from the point of view of being able to apply for some of those credentials that we be an incorporated entity, unless we would want, once again, to commission the Secretariat or another private entity to make an application to support our operations going forward, which hasn't ever been the intention of the organization. I should also say that if we intend, as an organization in the future, to, for example, charge membership fees, it will be important for us to know what form of organization we are asking people to become members of, and there will be a certain amount of lead time required for people to get clearance to actually commit membership funding to the organization. So from that point of view, it is also in our interests to move with all deliberate speed, making sure that we get everything right, of course, but also making sure that we do things as quickly as we're able. So Jim Fenton's question, I think, is a good opportunity to introduce Kim Little and to transition to her portion of the presentation. So Kim, Jim asks, for those of us who aren't familiar with 501c6, can you briefly summarize the function of the child corporation? So if you'd like, Kim, to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the proposal to the Management Council that's being brought forward to us, talk a little bit about C3s and C6s, and conduct the discussion going forward.
Sure. So, hi, this is Kim Little, and I was selected to be the chair of the Business Plan Subcommittee of the Management. Today I'm operating as just a member of the Management Council on behalf of Peter, since he's not here, to give this update. And of course, Jim, you asked a great question, and I had tried to streamline the presentation so I don't have a slide that talks about this. So before we start the slides, let me open up a previous slide deck. And I can try to give you a quick summary of some of the differences. Give me 1 second. See, it never pays to try to be nimble. This doesn't work for me. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, I don't want my laptop to freeze up. Okay, so the way that we, worked on this 501c3, 501c6, or what other organizational structure might be appropriate, is that we did go through the guidance from our legal counsel. And the way she laid out, actually, Sandy Spa England laid out the categories in the 501c3 and C6 in terms of what's different. And so, for example, one of the things that is different between the two, a 501c3, in terms of the primary purpose, would be public awareness, social welfare, education, and some certifications, whereas the 501c6 can also do things to promote trade, business, industry, things like annual conferences, trade shows, industry advertising programs, and as well as certification programs will fall under a 501c6. So having this combination of a 501c3 and a 501c6 that we're recommending allows the IDSG to have the flexibility that we need to be able to do both flavors, I guess, of the organization. In terms of differences, because they both are nonprofit status, in terms of differences has to do with things like contributions and donations. In a 501c3, donations are generally deductible as charitable contributions to the extent that nothing of significant value is received in the return for the donation. So all of us are familiar with like supporting an organization and getting mugs and T-shirts and those kind of things as a thank you gift. You're supposed to deduct those, you know. And a 501c6, no contributions to a 501c6. Those contributions are not deductible as charitable contributions. So there's a few things that are different. The main thing I would say is that the C6 really is designed to promote trade, business, and industry, whereas the C3 is a public awareness, social welfare, and education. So I hope that helps. And so we will have both of those at some point. When we did the last plenary presentation, we actually were talking about the C6 being the parent and the C3 being the child. And at this point, I would like to actually go into the presentation if, Jim, I hope that answers your question. And that'll kind of give us a little more, guidance in this presentation. And if there are more questions, I'll be happy to answer them after we get through the presentation, because I already see a number of questions. But one thing I do want to point out to Pamela, though, is that we are not trying to set up an organization for lobbying purposes necessarily at all. There are flexibilities within both organizations to allow for some levels of that, but that is not the purpose of why we would want to have two organizations. It's really just to have the flexibility, and that some of the efforts are kind of dual efforts, so it's more advantageous for us to go ahead and file for as much of those things and get those laid out together than separately. Okay, so let's go ahead and start the next slide. Can somebody forward to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so if I just wanted to do an activity recap. As Jeremy said, that the Business Plan Subcommittee presented recommendations on September 3rd of this month, and the Management Council did not have 100% attendance in that meeting. We had a quorum, so we had enough people, but the proposal did receive unanimous vote of approval from the voting members that were present. We wanted to make sure that we get the feedback from and gave the exposure to all Management Council members. So following the meeting, the members not able to participate in the vote were given the opportunity to endorse the position, the Management Council. And so as a result, 13 of the voting members of the Management Council supported the proposal, 1 abstained, and 2 did not express a view. So as you can tell, there was overwhelming support for moving forward and being able to present this at this time to our plenary. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to discuss or read out to you now is the recommendation overview. We're going to discuss a little bit about the Articles of Incorporation and bylaw review, next steps, and then answer questions. Next slide. So from a summary standpoint, and the good news is that most of the stuff should not be new. There have been a few minor tweaks, and I want to highlight those items. But we've tried to do a really good job as we were starting to form our recommendation to the Management Council, it worked out wonderfully that we had so many opportunities to also update the plenary in these in-person meetings that have happened. So the proposed names of the organizations are IDESG Inc. and IDESG Industry Association Inc. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in a second. The organization structure is both a 501c3 and a 501c6. The governance structure that we'll talk about is that the Management Council will serve as the board of directors for both organizations. And the revenue model is a member dues plus other things, and we'll talk about that too. Some of which already Jeremy kind of talked about, the ability to be able to apply for grants and those types. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked about having a parent and child organization. In the past, it was the 501c6 was the parent and the C3 was the child, after getting a lot of feedback from members of the plenary who weren't sure if there were anything that would prohibit them from being a part of a C6, but they thought that it had a lot more, it was okay for them to be a part of a C3. We took a lot of that feedback from the last plenary back to our legal counsel, and she felt that there was no reason that the C3 could not be the parent and the C6 could be the child. They're really, you know, and from that standpoint, almost interchangeable for which one should be the parent-child scenario. For ease of exposure, and just like the question that came out saying that we're familiar with the C6, most people are very familiar with the C3. This should make it easier for those members to be able to socialize that with the organizations that they represent, or for individuals who are part of our membership to also understand. So the bottom line is that a two-organization structure will provide the greatest flexibility for income streams and for future growth of our organization. And you'll see it's going to be a very common theme across everything that we have laid out, that, you know, we're very early in this organization. So what we want to do as much as possible is give ourselves the flexibility to grow and evolve, and to not make as many changes as possible around, like, for example, the rules of association. There's nothing within the rules right now that we are trying to modify, so we're trying to have flexibility and nimbleness to get this ball rolling. Next slide. So as I said, the governance structure, we're saying that the Management Council will serve as the board of directors for both organizations. There will be officers, and we'll talk about that in the bylaws and the articles of incorporation. And the officers of the new organization will be elected by the IDESG board. The proposed articles of incorporation and bylaws have been drafted for the C3, which is the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, Inc., and have been made available for review. So hopefully all of you have had a chance to take a look at the draft document. There will be parallel governance documents developed for the C6 that reflect similar language. It just made more sense we kept making it as these versions were evolving. It was easier to not have two sets of documents that we were trying to update back and forth. I will also say that these are draft documents, and that articles of incorporation and bylaws are not intended for us to have them etched in stone. So there will be, and we'll talk about this later as well, ways to be able to amend bylaws, and that's later in the presentation. Next slide. The revenue model. Again, this has been something that we've talked at every plenary, the last couple of plenaries as well. The recommendation is to fund the organization by a combination of member dues and other revenue streams, and that includes things like federal grants, sponsorship, possible certification or trust mark fees, if that is a path that we decide to go down as an organization, individual and corporate donations. So in other words, we'll take your money however we can. So we want to, again, give flexibility. And then another thing that was requested by the Management Council was to have a clear outline of what some high-level operating budget information would look like. We work closely with the Secretariat to be able to give a high-level view. You'll see that there are three options just to give you an idea, a low resource approach and a high resource approach. And, just by the conversations that, we had earlier, things like having the support of someone to provide the communications to the organization, to coordinate plenary sessions, to have IT resources or marketing resources. All of those are very different depending on the options. But what you'll see is that the proposed membership fee or the membership revenue coming from the fees is going to be, if we're able to convert at least 60% of our current membership into being paying members, we would generate approximately $626,000. Our total expenses range from $588,000 to $1.2 million, and as a group, we'll figure out where we need to be in terms of that budget. So it's going to be a much deeper dive into the budget, and we do have breakouts of this information that we'll share with the Management Council, but we'll have even further deep dives as the organization actually evolves. We will be electing, for example, a treasurer and other members, other officers within the organization once we become a incorporated organization. You'll also see on this, though, that if we choose options that require more support, so if you go back one more second, options 2 and 3, membership dues alone won't make it for us. We have to have more income streams. And so that's why we wanted to also have that flexibility to be able to get federal grants and other types of funding. Okay, now next slide. Thank you. I want to just remind you again of one very unique component of our organization that gets brought up in many discussions. We're starting, efforts around a strategic planning sessions, and this issue about our diversity of membership keeps coming out. It's one of the biggest strengths that we have as a group. And you see from this pie chart that we have a number of 25% of our membership are individuals. We have government agencies, commercial agencies, academic institutions, and nonprofits. And so we had to also use this information to be able to build out our membership fee schedule. And so it's a wonderful thing to have this level of diversity and involvement for our organization. Next slide. So here is the proposed membership fee schedule that was presented to the Management Council and approved by the Management Council, where we would have individual contributors at an annual fee of $100, academic institutions, and we're at $1,000. We have a tiered structure for nonprofit organizations, taking into consideration the feedback that we received about startups, especially in very small organizations with, for example, 1 to 5 employees. I'm getting a weird technical support and connections loss. Okay, I'll keep talking because I have the screen up. But I may not be able to see any questions that come in. Okay, so the 1 to 5 employees, that was a really important feedback that we received from a number of smaller organizations. So we have a fee structure that hopefully accommodates the different employee group sizes. We have a distinction between federal, state, and local government agencies, and then we have our for-profit employees, or for-profit companies. So that is the annual fee structure that we have laid out, and what drives the previous slide that you saw that had the operating budget. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the articles of incorporation, again, they are available online, and I know that Laura also just sent a link to them in the chat session. They were designed, again, to allow organizational flexibility and to complement our current rules of association. In the articles of incorporation, there are 9 articles. They're very straightforward, probably boilerplate things that you are used to seeing, naming the corporation, The period of duration is perpetual. The documents that you have are around the C3, so we'll have duplicate documents for the C6. The flexibility to give us more than one class of members if we need those. It identifies the registered agent, and as well as the business address, and then the initial board of directors is consisted of the currently elected members of the IDSG Management Council. There will be elections after that, but in order to go ahead and file for incorporation, we would use the currently elected members of the Management Council. The internal affairs of the corporation will be regulated by the board of directors as described in the bylaws. Article 8, very straightforward, no part of the net earnings will benefit or be distributed for personal or private interest. And Article 9, the incorporator would be Sandy Claw England, who is the legal counsel for operating on behalf of the IDSG, but employed by the Secretariat. And the next slide. The bylaws as well, very straightforward. There are 13 articles. The only thing in addition to kind of the things that we talked about in the Articles of Incorporation is that the Article 3, actually in Article 1, the purpose is stated to govern and administer identity ecosystem framework as detailed and described by the rules of association. So you'll see numerous times the rules of association are being referenced. And then the rest of the document gives, for example, the authority and duties of the director, the authorities and duties of the officers. At minimum, we have to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer, and then any additional officers as being necessary. The financial administration components in Article 7 would have our fiscal year from January 1st to December 31st. And then we have the standard conflicts of interest articles, non-discrimination, harassment, whistleblower protections, Article 12, that we will follow parliamentary procedures, and Article 13, amendment of bylaws, require a majority of votes of the board of directors. So hopefully this kind of gives you a understanding of the Articles of Incorporation and the bylaws. I do recommend that you take a look at those in more detail. I just didn't want to read to anybody the individual sections. And slide 12. Hello, slide 12. We'll go to slide 12. And this is just our next step, and then we can kind of open this up to questions. So we are requesting that the plenary endorse the Management Council's recommendations. We have been looking at this now as a group, almost a family, because we are, but as a group now for almost 6 months, I think. We've been taking different iterations and presenting the pieces as we've gotten them through, in the plenaries. We've been giving feedback to the Management Council. We've had ongoing meetings of the subcommittee that has been open to attendance, and we've had a pretty substantial group of people that have been participating. So now we're requesting the plenary's endorsement of the Management Council's recommendation. Then the next step, once we have that, is that the retained counsel for the IDSG will finalize the articles and bylaws, because as you see, they are actually draft documents at this time. And they would meet state statutory legal requirements to file and create the entities recommended. We actually do all of the filing for incorporation. We continue the update in the October in-person plenary. So we, definitely would give an update on where things are, as well as the January ones. And then we leverage the feedback from the plenary feedback on the value propositions and the output of the IDSG strategic planning activities to complete our new membership packet, really nail down all of our benefit statements and anything that you may need to be able to socialize this with the organizations that you represent. And I just want to also just put in a thank you for all of those that did fill out the survey and give feedback. We definitely looked at every one of the responses to try to see how we could take any feedback that was shared with us as well as be able to share anonymously any feedback that might help in the strategic planning efforts as well. So I just wanted to thank you guys for that part.
Okay, Kim. So I have a number of questions in the chat room, and I'm going to read them out to you one at a time.
Okay.
First, I'll read a question from Ann Rakuya Robbins. Wait a second, just a minute. I think this is in the context of the C6 filing. What kind of trade would we be promoting?
Again, this is all around flexibility, and so I don't have an answer to that at this point. We're trying to just ensure that we had both sets of organizations laid out. So I don't have an answer unless someone else does.
Okay, so but your basic answer is that this is that the proposal is to give us the flexibility to promote trade if we chose to do so in the future.
That's correct.
Okay. So the next question, as opposed to comment, is from Deborah Diener. Why would the officers of the new organization be elected by the IDESG board and not by the IDESG plenary? And by the way, I'll clarify. Here, I think we're speaking of the officers of the corporation rather than the officers of the IDESG Plenary and Management Council. So, in other words, why would the president and secretary of the corporation be elected by the board rather than by the plenary?
So, the board is the entity that is. So once we have the board, and again, the board will come from the management council. The board is designed to be able to carry out those activities for the organization. I'm not sure that I have any other answer for that.
So my understanding is that in a normal corporate structure, it is the responsibility of the corporate board to select the officers of the corporation, because the board of directors has the fiduciary responsibility. So officers like particularly treasurer and president have to be selected by the board rather than by the membership more generally.
Correct. The management, so the plenary is critical in selecting the management council, which then converts to the board of directors, technically, from a legal entity standpoint. And then that board is the entity that is wanted to elect the officers.
So this may, for Deborah's benefit, be a question that's appropriately directed to Sandy Faw England, our legal counsel, but my understanding is that it would be very unusual from a legal point of view for officers of the corporation not to be selected by the board. That would be viewed as an unusual governance structure by the legal system. So Brian Russell asks a related question: why would the management council automatically serve on both boards? Let me start by offering my interpretation of this. My sense is, Kim, that the recommendation that the management council compose the board of both of the corporations initially is simply recognition of the fact that the management council are the people who have already been voted on by the members of the plenary, and that any other group of people would be unrepresentative of the will of the organization without having another election. And so the management council members initially have been chosen to serve on both boards, but my understanding is that the intention of the proposal is to preserve the flexibility to change that composition if the organization chooses to do so in the future. Is that right or wrong?
Well, so the management council, I'm not sure, Brian, about the question in terms of is it that as we've established the organization, that the current management council automatically serves on the board, or that the board is both the C3 and the C6? So I'm going to answer both of them, and hopefully I'll hit one of your answers, or one of your questions. The current management council is being listed as the board of directors in establishing the organization, and understanding that once the organization is actually up and running for any period of time, we'll actually have new elections. So we have to select, kind of following the bylaws and rules of the bylaws and articles of incorporation. We've stated that the management council will become the board of directors. So that's why we have listed the actual current members. Every member of the management council does not automatically show up on the board, so we have to ensure that the organization or the individual that the management council member represents will permit them to be on the board as well. And we also are, and if it's an individual not representing an organization, that they also want to be on the board. There could be a situation where a management council member would abstain from joining the board. So we do have that situation. In terms of the management council being on both the C3 and the C6, the main issue there is that we didn't want to have duplicate efforts in terms of more efforts to be able to manage and govern the organizations. So our goal would be to try to have as much consistency as possible in the beginning, and to Bob's point, if it is viewed that we need to actually make modifications to that, we definitely have the flexibility to do so. But this would allow us to be able to have, for example, both meetings simultaneously, because there is a requirement, for example, to have at least one meeting a year of the board. So we would be able to take care of that, like tag that on to the management council meetings, because we will be operating our board meetings for like the C3, and then we could turn around and have, the deliberations that we need for the C6.
Thank you. So the next question comes from John McTaggart, and the question is the fee model final, or will it be voted on as an individual item?
It is not an individual item.
That answers half the question. Is the fee model final, or if the membership chose to try to change the fee structure, would there be a way for it to do that?
As it stands right now, the fee model is the final recommendation of the Business Plan Subcommittee. It was also approved by the Management Council. So what I'm presenting now is the Management Council's proposal that we're seeking endorsement from the plenary.
Thank you.
I would say, in general, everything, I guess, is nothing's ever completely etched in stone, but this is our recommendation.
Thank you.
As a final fee model.
So Ann Rafuya-Robbins asks a question, and Ann, I can't really interpret this, so I'm going to ask you to clarify your question, and I'll move on past it, and I'll get back to it. When you type it in again, you say, what does it mean, and the implications of having more than one class of members, or what might be some examples. I don't know what the it in this sentence means. What does what mean? So if you could clarify
I know what
your...
you mean.
Oh.
I know what you mean. So in the Articles of Incorporation and the bylaws, they make a statement that we have the ability to have more than one class of members. An example of this would be kind of what we have today. We have voting members and non-voting members. You have participants and observers. Those types of scenarios. Again, the way that this was laid out was to give us the flexibility to have those different classes of members should we as an organization want to have it.
So the next question is from Laura Reese. When would the elections for the new board take place?
So that will fall in alignment with the current the current elections as laid out by our rules of association. So let me pull up the timeline. pretty detailed timeline. With the assistance of the Secretariat, we did have the election dates and associated deadlines set up. So there will be, even if there was nothing else, I mean, so even if the unincorporated organization still was the only thing that existed, we still have a call for candidates on January 15th because we have two elections that have to happen for our organization. One is the at-large elected officers, and then our 14 stakeholder category representatives. So the actual election, one for the at-large officers, would happen between February 7th and February 19th. And then the results will be announced on the 24th, and then there's a second set of elections. We have all the provisions for, the same runoffs and everything else that could happen if there are runoffs necessary. And then election 2 would happen in March, around March 19th, and with the ending of the vote, March 24th. So we have a February and March time frame of 2014 for the Management Council, which then in turn would serve as the Board of Directors.
Thank you. Brian Russell asks, and I'll answer this one, do you have a plan B if the plenary doesn't approve the recommendations? So I should note that from the point of view of, so our rules don't say anything about incorporation. So it would be possible to file for incorporation. In fact, anybody can file for incorporation, and we would then have the option of becoming a work activity of an incorporated entity. But to the point of the procedure, Brian, if the plenary for some reason objects to the recommendation, I would imagine that we would then ask what the basis of any objections was, and we would take that back to the Management Council to submit a revised proposal as we normally do according to our procedures. At the end of the call today, I'm going to ask for a sense of the room just to make sure that as we're going forward with putting the recommendation on the electronic ballot, we know whether we are in a state of consensus or not. So John McTaggart Kim asks, were revenue projections based on 100% continued participation? And I will add an amendment to the question. If not, what was the estimation basis for revenue projections?
Yeah, so as I stated in the presentation, we actually based it off of 60% conversion rate of current members to being paying members. The ideal scenario would be to have 100%, but we know that based off of similar organizations going through processes that we've seen, it has been in the 60 to 70%. So we tried to be fairly conservative, actually, and we chose the lower level of that one at the 60% range. So I hope that we get 100%, though.
Thank you. So Daza has entered a long question into the chat, which I will summarize as basically two questions. The first, or the second, being, are we ready to put this onto the electronic ballot? And as I said, I'll ask for sort of a show of hands at the end of the call to indicate that. The second is essentially, does this reverse the presumption of our existing rules of association that the plenary is the decision body of the organization? My personal opinion is that it does not, but I'll say that with a somewhat of a caveat. So legally, in order to incorporate a corporation, it is necessary that the corporation have a board of directors, and from a legal point of view, the board of directors of the corporation is the ultimate authority for all decisions of the organization and bears the fiduciary and other legal responsibility. So if you want to incorporate at all, you have to incorporate within the framework of the law, and it's not optional that the board of directors is the final authority. However, I will say also that the current mechanism has the board of directors elected directly by the plenary, which is one element of sovereignty, and it is additionally the case that the ability to amend the rules of association under which we do business remains with the plenary. And it is my strong expectation that the Board of Directors, aka Management Council, going forward, would continue to exercise its responsibilities in accordance with the will of the plenary. So, as I said, I'll return to the second half of Daz's question at the end. Eric Skase asks the question, what actions would IDESG undertake that would require a 501c6 to be established now? If there aren't any that we would be doing right away, could we defer establishing the C6 today? So, Kim, would you like to address to that?
Sure. It was a business plan recommendation to the Management Council. One of two things, that we establish both organizations simultaneously, or that we establish the C3 followed by the C6 at a later date. Since the C3 will serve as the parent organization, it was the recommendation that the C6 not be established before the C3. So that was the only thing that we actually submitted to the Management Council in either or scenario. The Management Council then stated that since the work for both organizations is very duplicative in nature and actually could be a cost savings to go ahead and go down the path of taking care of both of them. It was discussed to then just move forward with let's take the least cost approach and establish both of them rather than actually do more work to establish it later on. So that was the only reason why the Management Council ultimately, I think, chose to move forward with both at the same time. But again, the most important part is getting the C3 part done. So in a sense, that's kind of, it's an either-or situation. So it's not a problem to do the C3 first and then later the C6. It's just a cost factor that we could benefit from doing both at the same time. We don't have to actually stand it up, but we could still have all the paperwork filed.
Thank you. Judith Fleener asks, in what state are we incorporating and why was that state selected?
So the incorporation, that one actually I have to defer to the Secretariat on, and it really needs to be where we could physically be, whether it be with a P.O. box or have a person involved. There are also some things that are required for federal grants that require a physical address, but for the incorporation portion, we actually don't have to have a physical address.
Yeah, so I actually had a few conversations with Sandy Fow England about this. By the way, Deborah Diener noted that I'm not audible. Kim, are you having any trouble hearing me?
No, I hear you even in my sleep.
Oh, that must be
I can hear you too, Bob, if I'm unmuted.
Okay, so Deborah, it may be your line, but I will endeavor to be loud and close to the telephone. Thanks for alerting me to this. So Sandy's representation to me was that there were several reasons for incorporation in Virginia. One of them was simply cost and the efficiency of the legal procedures for establishing corporations in Virginia, and the other was convenience. It is necessary to have a registered agent in the state in which you incorporate, and there are a number of IDESG members and staff who have physical addresses in the state of Virginia which could serve as a registered agent address, which in some cases is required for federal paperwork. So Eric Skase, so Scott David entered what looks to me like a comment saying self-sustaining board is common. I don't know whether that's a question or whether it needs to be addressed at all. I will bleep over it for the time being, and Scott, if you have something that you want me to follow up on, please type it into the chat window. Eric Skase says Section 208 seems wrong. It says a quorum shall consist of a majority of the board attending in person or through teleconferencing. And he then asks, how can a quorum be a majority of those attending? I believe that this is a legal phrasing thing. The intended interpretation of that sentence is that if a majority of the board is in attendance either in person or through teleconferencing, a quorum exists, which I think is not illogical. Eric also goes on to say, and by the way, I should point out that the attitude of the Management Council and of Kim's subcommittee has been to leave the composition of legal language to retained legal counsel and not try to wordsmith something which may have a standard legal form.
Right. I'll just add to that and just say that these documents were drafted by our legal counsel. We had no effort in actually drafting them. We had the opportunity to review them and ask questions, but the language drafting was done by our legal counsel.
Eric also notes Section 208 says if there's not a quorum, then a majority of the directors present may adjourn the meeting on occasion without further notice. What that means, Eric, is that if quorum is let's say 10 directors and there are only 9 directors present, 5 of them may agree to simply adjourn the meeting. There has to be a way to allow the meeting to adjourn if it can't conduct business, and that's simply, I believe, a technical procedure to allow the meeting to be adjourned in good order. Because there's no other action that you can take without a quorum. So John Stearns asks, who are the employees of the C6 and C3 companies? I think it's not legally required for a corporation to have any employees, but Kim, do you have an answer to that?
Absolutely. So going back again to that high-level operating model, we have employees that we have been able to leverage from the Secretariat. So, for example, we're not all 100% volunteer run. Thank goodness we have people like Kay and Laura and Sudi and others to be able to assist us. So all of the options that we have presented at a high level include things like a chief operating officer or administration individuals. It could be a percentage of an FTE for IT support or web content editor. All of those would end up being employees of the organization. And just to give you an idea, the option 1 to option 3 in that earlier slide kind of gave just, and these were just kind of examples again of like a 3 FTE employees up to like a 6 FTE employees. So we would try to figure out what is needed from a standpoint of where we think we need those types of support would be administration, marketing, web content, IT support, meeting planning, committee support, all those things that we are getting that support right now from the Secretariat.
So Daza asks a question, which I will summarize as saying, why are the plenary chair and vice chair not included in the board of directors? I think the simple explanation for this is that the existing rules of association repose the fiduciary responsibility for the organization exclusively with the Management Council, and that was the basis. So the 2 bases on which the recommendation to form the board as the Management Council members were proposed were, number 1, that the board be aligned with the set of people who had already been elected by the IDESG, and number 2, that it consist of people who had already been granted by the rules of association official fiduciary responsibility for the organization, which is the the role that the board takes on in the new organization. Kim, did you have anything to add to that?
I do not.
So Eric notes that Section 13 states that the bylaws can only be amended by a majority of the full board. and that completely removes the IDESG plenary from the process of determining how the IDESG is to be governed. And why did the Management Council feel this change was needed? So I'll say two things about this to start with, and then I'll turn it over to Kim. So first, the form of the bylaws and articles of incorporation was proposed by our retained legal counsel on the basis of, among other things, normal governance procedures and governance documents for incorporated entities. And number two, I think it's not accurate to say that the IDESG plenary is removed from the process of determining how IDESG is to be governed. The rules of association remain in place under the proposal that's been forwarded to us by the Management Council, and they are explicitly referenced in the bylaws. So, Kim, did you also want to say anything about this?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, this was the standard language in terms of how the boards of directors typically operate. There was no intention at all, and I do not believe that we have made any modifications to the rules of association. We tried to very much craft everything to respect the rules of association.
So Eric also notes that a board of 17 appears very large for an organization of this type, and why did the legal advisor suggest this as an appropriate board size? So Kim, my sense is that Sandy actually recommended to us that a smaller board would be better, but that we felt, we being the Management Council, felt that it would be a violation of the spirit of the previous votes of the plenary in favor of all of the Management Council members to exclude anybody from the board without going through another round of elections. Is that approximately right, or would you like to give your color on that?
You were exactly right on that one. So with Sandy's, experience, she did think that, we could do this with the board of 10 or less if necessary. But again, that is nothing that really fits within our current organizational structure, our current rules of association, or anything to that extent. So that was, again, our ultimate goal was to preserve the work that we've spent so much time on to establish these governance guidelines, and to be able to try to reflect as much as we could of that as we could. It was never considered a problem to have the larger size. It would operate the same way that we operate today.
So Eric also notes, and I don't have the proposed bylaws open in front of me, Kim, so I'm going to have you address this one. He asks, why was Section 2.09 put into the bylaws? There seems to be ample opportunity for the board to call meetings to deliberate any issue in front of it before taking a decision. And Eric then indicates that he believes that 209 prevents discussion before a decision is taken, which seems unwise. As I said, I don't have it open in front of me. Would you care to respond to that, Kim?
2.09 says action without a meeting is in the bylaws. Any action required or permitted to be taken at a meeting of the Board of Directors may be taken without a meeting if all the members of the board consent in writing to taking the action without a meeting and to approving the specific action. Such consent shall have the same force and effect as a unanimous vote of the board, as the case may be. As I read this, to me, this is no different than kind of our, and I hope no one takes this the wrong way, but it's the kind of ability to have the same flexibility as we do with e-deliberation, for example. So, again, this was language that Sandy put in, and it's standard language for boards to be able to have the ability, and again, the goal is flexibility, to be able to take action without having a meeting when it's necessary to do that with consent in writing. That may never happen, but it was just giving us that flexibility.
So my interpretation of this, Kim, and I'll ask whether Steve Mednick would like to make a comment on this, is that this is a standard term in Articles of Incorporation, and the reason that it's included is that there are some actions which a board may have to take where timelines are set outside the organization. So, for example, if somebody files a legal action against the organization, sometimes it's necessary to make a response to that action before the normal meeting notice and other procedures can be completed, and the board has to have a way to respond to special situations like that in order to discharge its fiduciary responsibilities. Maybe I don't think Sandy is on the call, but if Steve would like to comment on that.
Yeah, Bob, you hit the nail on the head. It's standard consent language. It's kind of language you see in most corporate bylaws, and just for the situation that you have described. You know, in the modern world, and it's a holdover language from a time where, you know, you did not have telephonic ability to communicate quickly. I mean, most boards could probably communicate very, very quickly, swiftly with the technology we have today, but in the past they would operate with these consents to be able to move without a formal meeting.
But I presume that under normal corporate governance, this is something which is only done under extraordinary circumstances and is subject to revisiting at subsequent events.
You could always revisit unless it's, you know, unless somebody else depended on the decision of the board, and it then, you know, makes it difficult to reverse a position. But this is not uncommon language for bylaws.
So Eric also asks, why are we reimbursing board members in Section 2.11 for expenses? No one else except employees is being reimbursed for expenses for participating in IDESG. Kim, do you have an answer to that?
In standard language, it says that the director shall serve without compensation, with the exception that expenses incurred in the furtherance of the corporation's business are allowed to be reimbursed with documentation and prior approval. That was the standard language that was incorporated into the document. That's it.
Well, again, so I think a relevant example here is that if you're on a board of directors, for example, if a legal action is filed, you might be compelled to appear, for example, for a legal deposition hundreds of miles or thousands of miles away from your place of residence, other than for a regular meeting of the organization. And I would imagine that it would be circumstances like those that would be contemplated by a reimbursement clause. Again, Steve, do you have any comment on that?
No, it's standard language. It's not something that has to be in there. I mean, but it's not unusual. It's not unusual language in bylaws. But again, I've seen bylaws with reimbursement, and I've seen them without reimbursement.
So does the language in 211 say that board members will be reimbursed, or only that they may be reimbursed?
They may be reimbursed. Shall serve, with the exception of the expenses, are allowed to be reimbursed with documentation and prior approval. I would imagine, it sounds like mandatory language. You may be allowed, or something like that, if you want to make it discretionary, and establish a policy before you put it in your bylaws, if there's concern about it. And I would imagine there'd be some kind of discretionary policy in terms of what kind of expenses would be covered. But I don't think this, it is written in mandatory terms the way it's crafted right now.
Thank you. So Eric also asks, by the way, I'll observe that we have about 20 minutes remaining for the call, so if you have questions, please get them in. So Eric also asks, Section 3.03 has what appears to be an incorrect cross-reference to 2.08. Probably 2.09 is intended, but removing an officer without a meeting and without discussion doesn't seem wise. Why is this permitted? Kim, do you have a read on that? And if not, Steve, do you?
This is Kim. I have no read on that. We can definitely go back and share with our legal counsel if there is a cross-reference that's incorrect in the draft bylaw.
The reference, let me look at what Eric was talking about, seems to be to quorum. Why wouldn't you want to have a quorum if you're going to remove somebody from the board? I don't, unless I'm reading the wrong section.
So you believe that? So you believe?
Sorry. So
yeah. the removal provision is 3.03, and it says that it must be in accordance with section 2.08, and it's saying that you need to have a quorum, is what it says. And unless Eric's concern is that it should reference the notice provision.
Well, certainly quorum seems appropriate.
Yeah, quorum.
There's no reference to action without a meeting, so the second part of the question really doesn't apply in that situation.
Okay. So moving on past William Fraser's comment, Eric asks, why are sections 10 and 11, non-discrimination, harassment, and whistleblower protections, limited to consultants and volunteers, and why are the sections necessary at all? Anyone like to address that?
I don't practice in the state of Virginia, so I don't know. It's not standard in other some of the states I deal with, although I've seen this language, but I don't know why. I can't tell you why council put this into this document.
It seems unlikely to me that an organization that didn't have non-discrimination protections in place would be eligible for federal grants.
But they don't have to be in your. They don't have to. They're not normally in. They don't have to be in the bylaws. You need to have conflict of interest provisions for the IRS. But again, they don't necessarily. You may have a provision in your bylaws that say you shall adopt a conflict of interest policy, and you adopt the policy separately. So certainly for the IRS, you need that. And you're right on non-discrimination and harassment, but I'm not sure they have to be in the bylaws. But again, I didn't draft these, so I don't know why council recommended them.
So it seems, I wonder if anyone has an objection to non-discrimination, harassment, and whistleblower protection clauses, even if just limited to consultants and volunteers. If so, please type it into the chat window. I have a couple more questions. We're going to have to start winding down here in a minute. Anne Rakuya Robbins says, I'd like to see a more robust comparison of pros and cons between incorporating in Virginia and Maryland. I think there are important differences. We can ask Sandy to give us her rationale for Virginia. I believe, however, that was discussed, right, Kim?
It was, and I would ask is if you know something, Anne, that is crucial about incorporating in Maryland, could you share that with us versus us trying to chase after that? Again, we're trying to best leverage our paid resources. So if you have something that you know that we're not taking into consideration, I think that would be the better approach.
So Eric asks in Section 12, which parliamentary authority, Roberts, and the answer is yes. Eric also says that I mentioned earlier that the rules of association are still in place, but wouldn't the provisions of the bylaws and articles of association take precedence? The answer to that is also yes, but that, in my understanding, is not an optional characteristic of a corporation. I believe that it is part of the essential nature of a corporation that its articles of incorporation and bylaws are binding. Am I right or wrong about that, Steve?
They are binding, but I think the intent of these bylaws, and again, I was not part of the committee, but I have just reviewed this issue in general, that the intent of the bylaws was to incorporate as much as possible the rules of association. And so there are a couple of issues here, if this is not resolved today, where we probably need, for example, the quorum rule. We spent a lot of time on quorum rule in ROA. The bylaws should probably simply reference where we have a provision in the ROA, should probably just reference the ROA and make that relationship more significant, and to tie the ROA in stronger where there are those common provisions. There should be reference to the ROA. But yeah, the bylaws take precedence, but the idea was to include the ROA by reference into these bylaws, and so you might want to take a look at melding the language a little more, because I think Eric's raised at least one, and there might be two questions where Robert's Rules is clearly enunciated in the ROA, not enunciated in the bylaws. We have a quorum rule; it should probably be referenced in the bylaws.
And as you all saw, those who had a chance to take a look, almost every section almost ends with, as set forth in the Rules of Association, as set forth within the rules. I mean, that was the intention. Again, the goal was not to circumvent or anything else the Rules of Association.
So, and in fact, the text references the Rules of Association and says that they're to be used to govern the proceedings of the organization. So Eric asks about Section 704. The funds of the corporation may be retained or invested as the board in its sole discretion may be desirable without regard to the limitations ... imposed by law regarding such investments. And then asks whether this is an injunction to allow the board to invest counter to the law. I don't have the full text in front of me. Steve, can you provide any illumination of this?
Not off the top of my. I mean, I can look at it in some detail, but it's not a section I've looked at. I can't imagine that that's what it says, but I'll be happy to look at it and try to give you a feel for that, or we may have to ask counsel directly.
So it is normal though for the board to be the sole authority for
to invest. To make investments. Yes, absolutely. That part of it is correct.
And what it states in 704 says the funds of the corporation may be retained in whole or in part in cash or be invested and reinvested on occasion in such property, real, personal, or otherwise, or other securities as the board of directors in its sole discretion may deem desirable without regard to the limitations, if any, now imposed or which may hereafter be imposed by law regarding such investments, and which are permitted to the organizations exempt from federal income taxation under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. So the purpose, again, was standard language that Sandy provided for investments, but not to circumvent any process.
So Deborah Diener says it sounds as if legal counsel didn't take into consideration the unique nature of IDESG in crafting these legal documents. There are numerous questions being asked about the documents. So my impression is that the first sentence of that is not accurate.
I agree.
So Kim, do you want to discuss how your subcommittee and the Management Council engaged with Sandy and went over with her the IDESG's characteristics before getting her recommendation?
100%. Yeah. So from the very beginning, all legal counsel that was being considered to work on behalf of the IDSG understood the very diverse membership that I reflected, the heavy emphasis as an organization that we have placed on governance, the importance of the rules of association, and our desire to not prolong this process with having extensive discussions that would ever modify the rules of association, because we know how much time that took as an organization. So I hope that everybody can see that level, I guess, of effort that was taken. So I would definitely disagree 100% with Deborah's comment that the legal counsel didn't take into consideration the unique nature. She took into consideration the positive unique nature and maybe not so positive unique nature of our organization.
So just to be clear, you're saying that Sandy was familiar with the unique characteristics of the IDESG and that you had conversations with her about how to accommodate that in the bylaws before she gave us her draft.
Yeah, so it was impossible. Yeah, and I would also state that Sandy's had the opportunity to meet with not just, she's met with the business plan subcommittee, possibly maybe just once, but she has spent several times meeting with UPOP, representatives of the Plenary, representatives of the Management Council, because it's not she is hired, she's retained by the Secretariat and then works on behalf of the IDSG Unincorporated. So she has had exposure to a number of members of the IDSG.
Okay, so we have a number of other questions, and I will go through a couple of these. So the first, Kim, is directed to you. When and how does the plenary get to see the dues, the new membership agreements, have deliberation opportunity, and ensure we have agreement before finalizing these items?
So we do not have a new membership agreement drafted at this point. The due structure, can the slides that are being shared be provided, or I can also take the Word document that we submitted to the Management Council and create a Word document format. So post this session, we'll have something posted to allow those to have another look at the fee structure and be able to reference that as much as you need.
So the next question is from Daza, and that is there a way for organizations which, because of their structure or operating rules, are not allowed to pay dues to be members of another organization, is there still a way for those organizations to participate?
So the goal would be to allow flexibility in participation. The voting members, as we have set forth now, would be those that did pay the dues, and then we would have participation from more of a observer status, the same way that we do today as well. So today we have a number of people that are actively participating, but they actually are not a formal member of the organization in terms of voting.
If I may, Bob, the liaison provisions that are in the ROA would still remain there, but they wouldn't be members.
Right. So we, I guess it's important to note that we do have liaison provisions in place, among other things, to accommodate situations like that. Let's see. Judith observes that in a lot of nonprofits, bylaws have as little language as possible and point to operating documents such as the ROA. So I agree on both points. The bylaws that have been proposed do point to our rules of association, and part of the explicit intention there was that most of the changes in the way the organization operates would continue to take place through amendments to the ROA rather than amendments to other governance documents. So
each section is almost every section is like one sentence that says as set forth in the Federal Rules of Association.
So I think we're getting close to the time where we're going to have to wrap up the discussion because we're running out of time for the meeting. So I will take Brian Russell's and Deborah Diener's questions as the occasion to do what I said I would do earlier. Brian notes that there seem to be several issues here, and Deborah notes that there are several questions being raised here today that she doesn't feel have been answered. So the relevant question, the proposal at the moment is the Management Council has recommended that the plenary endorse the proposal from the Management Council to incorporate an entity and to direct the executive director to undertake that incorporation using the proposed documents which we've outlined here. And so the question that I would like to ask, and by the way, I'll note that even though we do have a quorum, this is a sense of the room poll. It is not a vote and is not binding on anything, is whether the folks on the call today feel that we are ready to take that recommendation to a vote by electronic ballot to open not later than the 23rd of September. So what I would like to do is so once again I will direct your attention. Could you get the little yellow sticky thing out, Laura? Direct your attention to the little blue guy in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. There he is. He's got a little orange and yellow flashing tag on him. There's an arrow to his right and if you click that arrow, it will give you the ability to create either a red X or a green check mark. So I would like you to go to your little blue man, and if you feel that we are ready to take the recommendation of the Management Council to a vote, please select the green check mark. If you feel that we are not ready to take the proposal to an electronic ballot to commence not later than 23rd of this month, please select the red X. I will allow a sufficient time for everybody to register their opinion here in the column. I see some people are already expressing opinions. So if you haven't yet turned your little blue man into an X or a check mark, please do that. Tell you what, just so that I can have a termination procedure here, if you are not going to vote or you are a member of the staff and therefore not going to vote, please turn your little blue guy into a little blue guy with his hand raised so that I can tell the difference between people who haven't voted yet and people who aren't going to vote. So at this point, to me, it looks like we have about a 50-50 about a 50-50 split between ready to go to ballot and not ready to go to ballot, which I take as an absence of consensus. So here is what I am going to propose. I'm going to propose that any of you who believe that there is a specific change that needs to be made to the documents, and by documents I mean proposed articles of incorporation and proposed bylaws, in order to make them ready to go to a ballot, please get those specific changes to us by not later than a week from today. And please don't try to create language for the change. Please, instead of doing that, tell us what the substance of the thing that you need, that you think needs to be changed is, and we will refer it back to legal counsel for the creation of legal language. It creates a significant legal risk to have legal language drafted by somebody who isn't an attorney licensed to practice in the jurisdiction of interest. When our legal counsel has received those comments, Kim, I'm going to ask you to work with her to turn those changes around as quickly as possible, and we will then we may schedule another online conversation to discuss the revised text, or we may ask people to register their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the changes online. Deborah Diener asks the relevant question, to whom should we send our comments and questions? I would ask that you send them to Kim Little and copy Kay Shepard-Cohen. And Enrique Robbins notes to my earlier question, we need to be able in some way to review these questions and answers. So Kim, I'm going to ask that when you receive the requests for modifications, you put a list of them together that gets forwarded to our council, and that list come back with the revised text, and that the list be annotated with what changes our council has made, if any, in response to the objection, or why she has chosen not to make a change in response to the objection. Is that something that you can do?
Sure. And then are we putting a timeline on this?
So I'm asking everyone to have their comments in to you by next Wednesday.
Okay.
Which, by the way, what is the date of next Wednesday, Kay?
Sorry, it's the 25th?
Okay, by the 25th. And we will have, and so how quickly do you think you can turn around a response? That's a question to Kim, I'm sorry.
Turn around, so that's going to be dependent on the response from Sandy. But, I mean, I would say the ideal situation would be if I get all the responses, the questions in by the 25th, I can start to funnel them to Sandy, and hopefully maybe we can say that we can have the final responses by the 27th.
Let's see if we can shoot for that. And then we will post the revised documents to the website after we receive the revisions that Sandy has made, and we will also post her responses. Several folks are requesting that there be a way for people to discuss these things. I'm going to suggest that Kay, you set up a specific discussion forum item dedicated to discussion amongst members, open to all members, about the comments that are submitted, and that the discussion take place there.
Okay.
And we will aim to have the responses posted. So let's see, you said that, so 27th is the Friday of next week, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we will aim to have the responses posted by the 27th. We'll leave a couple of days for discussion of the responses in the discussion forum, and at that point we will make a decision either to announce an electronic ballot or to send a small number of additional comments back to Sandy based on the discussion that takes place in the discussion forum. I will note. Go ahead.
This is Kim. I don't know if everybody knows how to reach me.
Would you like to type the email address that people should use to reach you into the chat room?
Sure.
Or actually, instead of doing that, because this is ephemeral, Kay, can you post a notice of this procedure on the website with your address and Kim's address so that people will know how to execute the procedure?
Sure. That's probably an easier way for people to find it.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing, because what I don't want to have happen is I don't want to lose anything that comes in via chat, because that might not be, all those individual chats may not be safe.
Agreed. So I will note, however, that the electronic ballot for the e-deliberation procedures will go ahead as scheduled. There having been no controversy about this, and this having been through 3 prior readings. With that, I have abused your time to the tune of 3 minutes, and we will proceed to receiving your comments. Kay will be posting the mechanism for receiving comments, and will implement the creation of a discussion forum so that you can discuss these. And again, I would ask you to remember that here we are not proposing text amendments to our rules of association. We are talking about issues at the level of substance with the wording to be implemented by our retained legal counsel, since we are talking about the creation of a legal document. I see that there are 2 additional comments being typed in. I will wait for those to complete, and then I will ask that we close down the meeting. I see that there is 1 additional comment being typed in. Maybe none. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you as usual for participating in doing the business of the IDESG. I appreciate your comments. I am glad that we've had an effective and robust discussion today. We will move forward and we will resolve the issues that have been raised. And so thanks very much to everybody for participating in the discussion in the spirit of moving the organization forward. And let's do that as quickly as we can. So there's a request from Judith to leave the chat window open for reading for a few minutes. So Laura Barman, is it possible to actually get a transcript of the chat window that we could make available to folks?
Yes, I'll get a transcript.
Okay.
So it's the website.
Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this conference is now adjourned, and I commend to your attention getting your comments in as quickly as possible so that we can get the new incorporation documents finalized as quickly as possible and get on our own legs.
This concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect.